It is time for Around the 412 with Smitty and Tyler.
Welcome back to another episode of Around the 412. I am Tyler. With me, as always, is my co-host Smitty. Be sure to go follow us on all of our social medias at Around the 412. While you're listening on a listening platform or over on YouTube, go check out the description of the show. We got a Facebook link for everything custom designs. It's our friend Haley Wagner's small business. She does do customized clothing. We're about a week away from Valentine's Day. I did see she posted some stuff, so we might be a little too late before that. But who knows? You might be able to squeak some in a week before Valentine's Day. So go check that out. But she does more than holiday stuff. She does Pittsburgh stuff. She does other sports stuff. She does even Around the 412 merch. So if you want to go check that out, there's a Facebook link for everything.
Yeah, I wanted to wear one of the I'll wear it next week. I got to remember next week. I'll wear one of the shirts
next
on here
week.
so people can
there
see
we
it.
go.
Yeah.
Next week, Smitty will wear it. But yeah, go check that out. Facebook link. This is a Steelers show. We're going to have a more or less makeshift show filled with questions because there's not a lot of Steelers stuff going on. It seems like Artie Smith got hired, and you got me calling him Artie Smith now. It's Arthur.
Artie.
You got me calling him Artie Smith. Arthur Smith got hired, and it seems like after that, just all the Pittsburgh Steelers news just stopped. Which, I mean, to be fair, that was the top thing that was going on in the time. It seemed like every single day there was a new name being circulated for the offensive coordinator position. And then as soon as Arthur Smith actually officially gets the job, it's just dead silent because what are we waiting for at this point? I mean, we're kind of waiting until we get to like off-season free agent stuff. The Super Bowl hasn't even happened. That's this upcoming weekend. So pretty cold on the Steelers front, but we're still going to have some stuff to talk about.
I guess like maybe waiting for the staff to be filled out under him. You know, there's going to be some turnover. Like Frisman Jackson's not going to return. They turned over a couple other positions. Corley, their assistant quarterback coach, also not going to be back, as well as they're going to have a new offensive quality control coach. So yeah, there's a couple spots they're going to be filling. They did bring in somebody. Actually, they're interviewing pass game coordinator candidates, which is intriguing to me. Let alone they haven't had that position. Like we expect that the quarterback coach, which could be Mike Sullivan, but also sounds like they're interviewing outside people. So like, don't know how great I'm feeling if I am Mike Sullivan, like kind of incumbent for now. But we will see if that remains. But they interviewed Chargers assistant Tom Arth, who was I don't know much about him. I'm not going to pretend to. I don't know what his background is here, other than that he was a backup quarterback to Peyton Manning with the Colts during his time, and also obviously coming from the Chargers with Brandon Staley, would have worked with Justin Herbert there. So that's obviously an intriguing aspect of his background too, but I'm not going to pretend to know, what his philosophical ideas are with offense or what he could bring to the table or anything like that. Just know a couple of the stops that he's had in his football journey. So we will see how that plays out. Really intrigued by the wide receivers coach stuff too. Like, do they go young because like Nick got to me. Nick Farabaugh mentioned on Steelers Afternoon Drive. He's like, they should take a huge swing here at the college level and give Brian Hartline a call. Okay, as an Ohio State fan, I don't love it, but like I'm a much bigger Pittsburgh Steelers fan than I am an Ohio State fan, and that guy just produces star receiver after star receiver. I mean, no issue at all if Ohio State loses Brian Hartline to the NFL, only if it's for the Pittsburgh Steelers. So that would be definitely intriguing to me. But what about like a Brennan Marion too? A guy that was at Pitt, obviously now at UNLV as their offensive coordinator. He would be interesting too. I mean, obviously developed some great receivers along his way too, and he's still just in his mid-30s. Like I'm along with Nick in the mindset of I would like to see them go the young route as opposed to like one of these retreads like they've kind of been doing.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that you look at the way the NFL and just football in general is moving as far as the offensive schemes goes. It's all typically the younger audience that's been doing that. This is younger coaching that's been doing that. I think
you got the experience surrounding it. Like if you would have went the young route with I might not be pushing for this as much, but like because it's Arthur Smith, because it's Mike Tomlin, like the rest of the staff kind of gives them the ability to go young with wide receiver coach.
Yeah, I mean, Brian Hartline would be an absolute dream if you're hiring a wide receiver coach. Just looking at Ohio State, the absolute factory that it is when it comes to pumping out wide receivers at a high level. I mean, how many first-round draft picks have they had over the past several years?
I mean, after Marvin goes, it'll be 4 within the last 3.
Yeah, that's nuts. That's nuts. Also, I think as far as getting a passing game coordinator, and you mentioned the Steelers never had that position before. I wonder if that's like the Steelers being self-aware, knowing who they hired as their offensive coordinator, knowing that it's going to be predominantly more run game heavy focused is like what his specialty is. And so they're more open-minded to bringing in a passing game coordinator, or at least having that position for the first time, because they're just being self-aware of the kind of guy that they brought in. And while the Steelers, and we talked about this at length when we talked about Arthur Smith, while the Steelers offense fits the mold that Arthur Smith could bring for an offense and in the history that he's had with running an offense, maybe they're bringing in a passing game corner to not only help out the creativity on that end, and not rely on just Arthur Smith to come up with that, but also get more creative with the passing schemes that can showcase them, like Kenny Pickett more, or even help out Kenny Pickett more. I don't want to say showcase Kenny Pickett more. He hasn't really shown anything. We need to help out Kenny Pickett more to make it easier on him so he can try to do the minimum amount.
Yeah, maybe it is self-awareness. Maybe it's awareness, and maybe I would say that's part of it. Maybe it's also part awareness to what's going on around the league. I mean, even if you want your bread and butter of your offense to be through the run game, I think you got to realize like this is still an offense that you look at Arthur Smith's time in Tennessee. The passing game, while there was a lot of stuff that was kind of uninspiring about just like the pure drop back passing game aspect of it, really good at play action. They still took their fair share of deep shots down the field. Like you're going to need a wide receivers coach that can get these guys into the right positions, and understand spacing and everything like that. And yeah, I don't know. I think it's a relatively attractive job too when you look at least at the top two guys in this receiving core, and assuming that they're going to add a third one. And that's a great segue, because that's where we'll start get one of our questions here from the based Yinzer, which, by the way, great name. How important is upgrading slot receiver in Arthur Smith's offense? Now, this is interesting. Least amount of targets for slot receivers in Arthur Smith's offense last year with Atlanta, just 34 targets for slot receivers. I don't know that it's necessarily important in that aspect, but like I look at the build of wide receivers that he's typically had, and the Steelers are kind of missing that right now from what they have in their offense. And I think that's why it's just like so logical for people to think Mac Hollins, who he had in Atlanta, massive bodied receiver, is a free agent this year as well. I mean, yeah, if you're predicting him to come to Pittsburgh, definitely get it. Like him or Keith Smith, their free agent fullback, because you need a fullback in Arthur Smith's offense as well. Definitely makes sense to link to Pittsburgh. But getting back to the wide receiver thing, I don't think that you're looking at a third or a slot option here as somebody that is going to be like a high volume pass catcher. But I think that you're looking for, and maybe it's Deontay or George moving into that spot, because AJ Brown was getting a fair share of targets a fair share of snaps from the slot while in Arthur Smith's offense in Tennessee, moving pieces around. So maybe it's not necessarily a guy that's like a high volume target guy, but I think that you still need to bring in another receiver again, whether that's for the outside or playing inside. That kind of fits the mold of what Arthur Smith's had in the past. I mean, think about it. AJ Brown, Corey Davis, Drake London, Mac Hollins, just these massive bodied receivers. George Pickens is kind of within that realm, but like that height weight combo of all these other guys, like Deontay Johnson certainly doesn't fit that. We're going to talk about him in a little bit, but they're really kind of missing that from the room right now. So they're going to add a receiver for sure, whether it's in draft or free agency. And I would expect it to be kind of along like more of that height weight threshold.
Hey, I know a guy, Chase Claypool. Maybe the Steelers can get him. A big slot. I think it fits perfectly.
Oh, man. Wouldn't that be something?
I mean, I'm sure somebody can get the Photoshop ready right now for him in a Steelers jersey. It's probably not going to be hard to make. I think that's perfect. I think that it's fairly obvious that regardless of whether you're talking slot or whether you're talking outside, I don't really think it matters. It's fairly clear to me that this offseason, the Steelers need to add another wide receiver, because currently your wide receiver 3 is Calvin Austin, and you don't want to go into the season
one's on an expiring deal.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you don't want to go into the season with that kind of looming over your head, whether they're going to bring in somebody in free agency or if they're going to get somebody in the draft. I mean, it's the Steelers, so the draft is always in play when it comes to receiver, especially on day 2, I feel like. But if you want to talk about slot specifically, I do think that it's something that's missing from the Steelers, going back to really since Juju was in the slot. I think that that's the last time that they've had a true slot receiver that can that can not only like get some volume from the position, but get productivity from the position. They haven't really expected that. I mean, we were talking about just this past season that Pat Freiermuth was going to be the Steelers' pseudo slot receiver at times because of how many times that he gets spread out. But they didn't really have a true slot wide receiver. Whenever Juju left, we were hoping that Chase Claypool could take over that slot receiver role and be a big slot receiver. And I mean, joking aside, like if he had lived up to expectations based off the history that Arthur Smith has had at that position, he would have been a perfect candidate to be able to play that role. But outside of the past of what we saw with Chase Claypool, him being traded to the Bears and then going to Miami, I mean, what a train wreck that was. I think they do need to bring in somebody because I'll be honest, even though George Pickens could probably fit the bill like some of those big slot receivers that Arthur Smith has had, I don't want to move him from the outside. I think his biggest threat is being an outside receiver. And like you said, Deontay Johnson doesn't really make sense. So if they wanted to bring in Matt Collins or bring in somebody else in free agency or even look in the draft to find somebody that fits that mold, I think that would fit perfectly. But as far as like who they have right now, I don't think that either of those guys really makes sense to move into the slot, at least for an Arthur Smith offense. Everybody's going to look at Deontay Johnson and be like, if you're talking about height to weight ratio, they're like, he's built to be a slot receiver. I'm like, yeah, but not necessarily in this offense. And then you look at the way Deontay Johnson's played as a Steeler and the productivity he's had on the outside, the type of route runner he is. I mean, I think you need to keep him on the outside as well.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing with playing in the slot is you're getting mismatches against like linebackers and safeties. Obviously, like I think the way it's prioritized now, you have like true guys that are being drafted high and specialized in playing in the slot, but typically that's you're looking for mismatches. And when you have a guy like Deontay Johnson that you know can separate on the outside against teams' best boundary corners, you don't go away from that and move him inside. So yeah, I like him playing outside. I like Pickens playing outside. So I think they do just need a traditional slot. Taylor says, what do you think about the Steelers running back situation going forward? This is interesting because obviously we know Najee Harris, Jalen Warren, best 1-2 punch or one of the best 1-2 punches in the league. Still going to be back next year, but I think it's like interesting to think beyond that. And I try not to get too far ahead of myself, but like, you know, the Najee Harris 5th-year option going to be coming up. Obviously, what are they going to do with that? Are they going to be comfortable paying what that is with the productivity that they've gotten from Jalen Warren, or do they want to pair another, you know, 1A, 1B situation type back with Jalen Warren and not have to pay that cost? It's interesting. I think the Steelers just value Najee Harris much more than maybe a lot of people do. You know, not only did they spend a 1st-round pick on him, but just with his durability, which they obviously. How many times do we hear Mike Tomlin talk about players' availability? You know, I just think that they value it way too much, and he's been available. You know, he's like Gumby. He gets into these like really scary situations where it looks like he's just going to tear everything in his leg, and he just pops right back up. Like ridiculous that he hasn't suffered more injuries than he has. I'm sure he's taken his fair share of bumps and bruises, but I think the Steelers value Najee Harris very highly. I expect that he'll be back, like on that 5th-year option for sure. But I really do think that they're going to approach him about a contract extension even. I do think that they want to keep these two guys together. I can't necessarily fault them for the idea of thinking that these two guys are better together than they would be separately, because I definitely agree with that. But there certainly is also a limit to what I would pay a Najee Harris to have him back. And I could see the Steelers going above what I would be willing to give him, because I think that they value him as a player. I think they value what he brings to the table. And I think they value the way football can be played with Najee Harris on the field, maybe more than I do as well. It's a more traditional line of thinking that the Steelers have, as opposed to the way a lot of the league is trending.
Yeah. I mean, it's no secret how not just me, but both of us really feel about the running back position. But I mean, I've spoken at length how I feel about the future of running back for the Steelers and extending Najee Harris. And I get it. Like, the Steelers are not going to agree with me, most likely, and most people probably wouldn't agree with me when it comes to my opinion of like running back. You just kind of move on from them when their time is up, and then you just find another one. And in this case, the Steelers kind of have a running back that they could pair or have in a placeholder whenever they get rid of whatever, if they were to get rid of Najee Harris with Jalen Warren. But I have come around to being okay with the idea of keeping Najee Harris around as long as it's with the right number. Now, the right number to me and the right number to the Steelers, kind of like what you were saying, is completely different, probably, especially when it comes to years and everything. But I think that the Steelers' future running back room, you're looking at it. I think that the Steelers are going to probably give an extension to Najee Harris, and you're going to have him and Jaylen Warren for the next several seasons, as long as they still continue to be productive in their roles, which they have been, to be completely fair. Like Najee Harris is back to 1,000-yard seasons. I understand he gets a load of touches out of the backfield, but he's been productive whenever he's been the number one back, and he's gotten better. And especially last season, looking at it, he got better as the season went along. And there's times where Jaylen Warren was going to be called upon to be the number one back by the fan base, and that wasn't the case. And there was times we saw why Najee Harris is still considered the number one back. But I think that for the future of the Steelers running back room, you're probably going to bring in another guy who is going to be that running back 3, play special teams, not really going to see offense that often, and then you're going to have these two be the workhorses for the next at least 2 to 3 seasons, I imagine, because I would think that Najee Harris is going to get an extension past this upcoming season for a couple more years, and then you're probably going to see another like shorter extension for Jaylen Warren as well, as long as they still stay productive. But as of right now, I see no reason why that is going to change moving forward, especially with Arthur Smith as your offensive coordinator. We don't know what they're going to be like in a run game coordinators. I mean, not run game coordinator, a run specific offensive coordinator, what they're going to look like in that type of offense.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said the thing about the RB3's role, because, a lot of people talking about Le'Veon Bell wanting to make a comeback, and he would only do so for the Steelers. But, that's the thing, the special teams value. You got to be able to play special teams if you're an RB3 on a roster. That's just the way it is. Yeah, and he does not add that value to them. Love Le'Veon. He might actually come into the conversation here with the next question I'm going to bring up. Those are the only 2 questions that we got for this show specifically, but we had some in the bank that we had gotten asked, that I had gotten asked, that I'm going to bring over to this show and answer here. They want to know, and this is from Big Cat, your choice, not that Big Cat, different Big Cat.
Big Cat.
Your choice. Yeah, not the Big Cat.
I didn't know we had that kind of outreach.
This is this is with a K. Well, hey, other Big Cat, if you are listening, we appreciate you. Let us know if you want to collab. Big Cat with a K says favorite all-time Steelers draft pick. And Le'Veon came to mind for me for this, because I always say this, and this still holds true. I've never enjoyed watching a player more than watching Le'Veon Bell's Steelers tenure. Just like the way that he ran was so different, and he set a precedent going forward. He kind of paved a way for a new type of running back. And it was just special for me to watch. Had him in every fantasy league across the board, all those years that he was with the Steelers, anytime I get my hands on him. So there's his run with the Steelers, super special to me. Was heartbroken when he left. I've forgiven him now. I think that he's on the other end of Antonio Brown, where he's done everything to try to make amends for the bridges that he burned on his way out. But how can you not say TJ Watt? In our lifetime, think about it. We've watched a player get drafted the same year that we started this podcast. And arguably, I don't think he's there yet, but by the end of his career, very possible that he's on the Steelers Mount Rushmore. And it happened in our lifetime.
Yeah, I mean, he's already the career leader in sacks for the Steelers, so it's only up from there. I'm not going to count. I don't know if you were even thinking about these types of players, but I'm not going to count Troy or Hines or anybody like that, because let's face it, we don't remember them getting drafted. we weren't watching the NFL.
I wasn't watching the NFL draft, but I do remember when Troy got drafted, just because of my dad's reaction.
That's more so what I mean is we weren't actively watching the draft and being aware of really what's going on as we do now. So immediately my mind was thinking of basically 2010s to now, and I kind of want to cheat and split this between 2 guys, and the obvious one is the guy you just said, TJ Watt, gonna be, or could possibly be, in the Steelers Mount Rushmore. Definitely, I mean, post Troy, definitely the most impactful defensive player that we've seen from a Steelers defender.
Yeah.
And really since that 2000, mid 2000s Steel Curtain defense, he's the best defender since then.
Could you imagine those teams?
What? Oh my goodness. I mean,
just drop him onto those teams. I mean, no slight to LaMarr Woodley or anything, because LaMarr Woodley was really good for that run too, opposite of James Harrison. But man, yeah.
Just imagine.
Go ahead.
So yeah, that's like the obvious one, especially for people like us who like are really into the NFL draft and have been for the past several seasons. Like that's really the obvious one. The one that I would say, and I'll categorize this a little bit differently, and just because of the way that the question was asked, my favorite draft pick was actually, I would say it's going to be James Conner. And I think just because of what that draft pick meant to him and what that meant to the city of Pittsburgh to see him be drafted to the Steelers. I mean, he's a Whippio kid, whether people want to argue that or not. When he played high school, he was a Whippio kid. And then he goes to Pitt. You have the whole cancer situation, him coming back and being the ACC's like all-time touchdown leader, having the senior season that he has, and then to be drafted by the Pittsburgh Steelers, his hometown team, and to have great success for several seasons here post Le'Veon Bell. I think that is probably my favorite pick as far as like not necessarily the best player they've ever picked, but just what that pick meant to that player, what that pick meant to the city. I think that one, the story behind that pick is probably better than any other story that you'll see.
Yeah. That's a good shout. I like that. I like the reasoning behind it. That year they had two really emotional. You remember how emotional Juju was getting drafted by the Steelers too? That was the same year. So yeah, 2017, same year as TJ. 2017 class.
That 2017 draft class was just a lot of fun. At least the first
Cam Sutton.
Picks. Yeah. It was a good class.
Yeah, good stuff. All right, moving on here. Actually, why did I exit off of this? I got to pull this back up. Well, because I was taking the questions from. I literally have to have a separate tab open for Twitter, and I was taking them from a tweet. But I like clicked off of that tweet because somebody sent me something. I was looking at it. But okay, we're back. We're locked in now. I'm not going to click off of this. With DJ's role in the offense, Deontay Johnson, DJ, still uncertain. Is it possible he could be used to a certain extent in the Khalif Raymond role instead of Calvin Austin? So this is interesting. Don't know if we talked about it on here, but definitely talked about it with Alan on Steelers Afternoon Drive. Khalif Raymond was a player that Arthur Smith had in Tennessee. He's now with the Detroit Lions, but like very similar to Calvin Austin in terms of, the height, weight combination that he has there, the special teams value that he brings, how you get the ball into his hands, kind of a speed demon, a lot of yak, possibilities with him. I think that what's interesting about it, though, to me is, again, I just can't get away from the fact that like Deontay Johnson, to me, if it were up to me, pretty much exclusively would be lining up on the outside. I think what you could do with Calvin in this offense, similarly to the way that Khalif Raymond was used, was a lot of like jet sweep stuff. Even though people don't want to hear those, they're very effective. And just getting the ball into his hands in space, quick screens, a lot of quick in or out breaking stuff. Like I think that I would not want to see Deontay Johnson used in that way. I know that we have a lot of questions about Deontay Johnson's usage in this offense because it's a lot of play action, deep shot pass stuff that kind of caters more to a George Pickens type player. But I don't know. I don't see it, and that's not even taking into consideration. This is probably why they said to a certain extent, because they didn't want to talk about the special teams value, because I don't see a way that we get Deontay Johnson. Like they're not going to throw him back there unless
go return punts again.
Yeah, like 3 guys would have to get hurt to see Deontay Johnson return punts at this point in his career. It'd be like, Antonio Brown. They did everything to try to not have to have him return punts, and then like 3 guys would get hurt, and all of a sudden Antonio Brown's returning punts again. But yeah, I mean, I appreciate the question, Joel, but I don't see it.
I don't see it either. I just got done talking about how Deontay Johnson is your best route runner. He's best suited for the outside. And you had added on to that saying how you're not going to get a lot of guys that can be able to separate space on your best like man coverage corners in the league. And Deontay Johnson can provide that. So for the role that you're talking about, I don't see that. I mean, if you want to try to bring in somebody else to do that or have Calvin Austin do that, I think that that's probably the way the Steelers should go. And considering especially what I already mentioned, like George Pickens and Deontay Johnson are your top 2 receivers. After them, it's a big question mark of who's going to be wide receiver 3 next season. I don't think that you want to take one of your top 2 wide receivers, arguably your number 1 receiver, especially when it comes to the route running and agility that Deontay Johnson has. And I understand by like looking at the type of receiver that Deontay Johnson is when it comes to the build, agility, I understand why somebody would ask a question like this. But I think when you look at what the Deontay Johnson means to the Steelers offense, especially on the outside in man coverage and being able to separate and get space, I don't think that they could even afford to really have him in that role, let alone even just like think about moving him there. I don't think the Steelers offense will be able to afford to do that unless they were able to bring in a big upgrade to wide receiver 3.
I have an idea, but we'll get to that. I'll just tease it for now because we're going to start talking about the draft more and more as it gets closer. And there's a player that I'm really a fan of that I think is going to be within their wheelhouse. Steelers 22 says Corey Trice, realistic expectations. No, it's weird to ask about a 7th round pick, but I really like his tape coming out of Purdue. Know a lot of Steelers fans were excited about how he looked in training camp. Man, yeah, what a bummer that he wasn't able to get on the field at all this year, just because for a 7th round pick, I agree with you. Like, I thought that he was a guy that could have gone on the back end of day 2, and I wouldn't have questioned it certainly earlier in day 3 than he did go. Yeah, I would have liked to have seen him get some reps this year as like a big slot. I thought he could kind of be like a tight end eraser, kind of in like that Terrell Edmonds role, or a way that Flowers had been used in Cincinnati for them in their Super Bowl run. But, obviously that didn't come to fruition. Now you're he's behind the 8 ball now, as a rookie that missed his rookie year. He's going to be a rookie again, basically, going into 2024. And it's almost like the defensive version of Calvin Austin going into year 2, where you miss your rookie year completely and you're basically a rookie again. I think that he'll have an opportunity to be a contributor. We'll see. It's hard to have this conversation even prior to like we're talking before free agency and the draft, not even just before one of those things happening.
Yeah.
Like very well, they could add to this cornerback room multiple times over through both free agency and the draft. So, I would like to think that he's going to have a shot, even if it is as like a fit. Maybe he's looking to like unseat a James Pierre, and those two are having a battle for that last cornerback spot. I do think they like him. I do think that he showed enough in camp prior to or in the offseason, basically after getting drafted prior to getting hurt, because it was early in training camp when it happened, to say like, I'm here. And I think that he's going to get a shot going into next, camp and everything like that to earn a roster spot. But man, that's a lottery ticket. If anything, you cannot be hanging your hat on this guy potentially being the answer opposite of Joey Porter Jr. I think that's a pipe dream. If it happens, great, but it's certainly not something you can be like putting all your chips in on.
Yeah, we talked about Trice Jr. a lot last summer whenever he was going into camp, and talked about the excitement of, wow, we got this guy in the 7th round, excited to see what he could do. But when you're talking about a player that's coming back from injury, especially a season-long injury, you never know what it's going to be like when that player gets in pads again and what they look like compared to their peers once they get back from that injury. So, and as you just pointed out, we have no idea what they're going to do free agency wise. We have no idea what they're going to do draft wise. We've talked about how corner could be potentially in play at their 1st round draft pick. I think that's one of the positions that could definitely go, especially with the way that this draft class is shaping out and what the Steelers' needs are. That I feel like at 20, there's several positions that could be taken, or at least a few that could be taken. Corner's definitely one of them. And so while that's the case, I think the best case scenario for him is to stay healthy, not re-aggravate anything, not do anything. And then, like you said, try to prove that you can still play, try to prove that you deserve a spot on this team, because obviously the Steelers liked him enough to take him. And this is a guy, like you had mentioned, and like we talked about last summer, like this is a guy that could have been gone what in our mind in like the 4th or 5th round, not even higher. Derek had him in this top 100 players in the draft in last season's class. So this is a guy with some pedigree to him. But when you miss an entire year, whether it's right or not, you kind of get forgotten in the shuffle. And obviously the Steelers are going to give him a fair shot when it comes to this upcoming season. But you lost a season. You have lost a season of playing time, and so you're kind of going to get lost in the shuffle again. He's going to have to prove to himself. not only himself, but the Steelers, like that he can still play and play at a high level enough to be able to make this team. And that's another player that you're talking about, like unseating a guy like James Pierre. We want to talk about like running back 3 having to play special teams. Like Corey Trice will have to play special teams too if he wants to make this team as well. When you're talking about a player that is like your corner 5, that's a guy that is typically playing special teams at a regular basis. So if they get to that point, he's not only going to have to show that he's a good corner, but show that he can play special teams too.
Yeah, absolutely. Talk about guys coming off injuries. Last question here from T. Walker. Are Holcomb and Quan, if he stays, expected to recover in time for the season? Or are we worried about a dip in performance for them considering what happened to Devin Bush post-injury? Yeah, I wouldn't even like throw the Devin Bush aspect out of that. I mean, everybody's different. You know how everybody should come back from injury. I'm just saying, like, I think that there was something more for him than just the physical aspect of things. But, you know, with Holcomb, for sure, like I know that he's been back at the facility even in the offseason. He's running and everything like that already. He's going to make a full recovery, be ready to go for sure in full capacity. Quan Alexander, don't even know if he's going to be back. He's a free agent. I don't know. Guys that sign 1-year deals and then get hurt on that 1-year deal, like a season-ending injury, the chances of him coming back, I would say, are pretty slim. You know, you still have a Landon Roberts in the fold. You have Mark Robinson back in the fold. And you have, you know, maybe they, well, yeah, I'm not saying that that's something to like, you know, be super excited about. Just saying he is on the roster. And do they like anybody that they saw at the end of the season enough to bring them back over? You know, Quan Alexander come back from injury, whether it's Miles Jack again, or if he's going to actually retire this time. Michael Walker, like, did they see something from him? I don't know. I mean, or are they looking to add somebody else in free agency or the draft to that position? Like actually try to find a longer term solution as opposed to these stopgaps. Predictively, I don't think Quan Alexander is going to be back, but I do think that Cole Holcomb obviously is going to be back, and I expect that he's going to make a full recovery. Thank goodness that there was no damage done to the patellar tendon like there was originally some fear for. So, you know, I think that based off where he's at right now, what we've seen, what I've heard about his recovery from other people, I fully expect that he's going to be back healthy and be the player that he was, you know, prior to that injury.
Yeah, I would expect the same for Holcomb. Quan Alexander to me is the one that is more interesting as far as like possibility of coming back. I don't think that he played, like he didn't play a ton prior to the injury as far as like actual, like he obviously played in the games, but what I'm trying to say is like you don't really have a lot of tape on him as a Steeler, so it's not like somebody that was playing for several seasons for you. It's a 1-season guy. It's not the same. Now the interesting part is the Steelers, as you were listing off the guys that could come back. I mean, there's not a lot going on with that linebacker room as far as potential returners that are going to be at an effective level. I mean, we're talking about Mark Robinson, who the Steelers literally would have rather pick somebody out of the stands to play linebacker than play Mark Robinson, it felt like. And then you're talking about
Miles
guys
Jack
that are coming out of retirement. And I do think that Miles Jack probably thought he was retired, but then the Steelers just needed help. Like they were Kevin Hart, like help me. Like because they did, and that's because they didn't want to play Mark Robinson. That's why.
Yeah. And in his mind, he was probably like, "Yeah, sure, I'll come and collect a paycheck." And then like more injuries happen. He's like, "Oh, I have to play now." Like this wasn't what I signed up for.
Yeah, I think linebacker is a key position this offseason for the Steelers too, because you got to get better depth at the position. I think that last season showed that. You can't rely on just your starters for an entire season. Injuries happen, and you saw 2 major injuries to your linebacker room. You're basically relying on a Landon Roberts to cover the middle of the field by himself, especially if Mark Robinson was also on the field. But I just think that linebacker is one where, and that's why I'll leave the door cracked for Quan Alexander to come back. If I had to be a betting man and make a prediction right now, I would say no, that he's not going to be back. I think that's more likely that he's not. But I think the door is at least cracked open because of the state of the linebacker room for the Steelers. There's just not a lot there.
Absolutely. I don't know what the plan is because like we're look ahead to the draft. We keep talking about the offensive line. We're talking about corner, like talking about adding a receiver. Where does linebacker fit into all of this?
I mean, I could tell you
Or
one
does
thing:
it?
is linebacker's not going to fit into one of their first probably 2 or 3 picks.
Right.
Like,
So does that make more sense
and
for
that's
free
more
agency?
so for me. Not even looking at only the Steelers' needs, but just looking at this draft class in general. I feel like by the time
Yeah.
the Steelers are looking at a linebacker, you're talking about like day 3.
Right. Peyton Wilson, NC State. That's all I'll say. Keep an eye on him. I think he'd make a ton of sense.
That could be a good pick.
Yeah. I think that he'll be there on day 3, at least early on day 3. Maybe one of those 4th rounders could be him, unless he just absolutely blows it, which he could. I mean, he's a freak athlete. I think what's going to knock him down is there's no player that's played the position. Like, there's not a blueprint for somebody his size playing off-ball linebacker. So
Yeah,
it'll be
I
interesting.
mean, you know where I'm at with the first round pick. So I'm excited to talk about draft. Like, obviously, we still have a couple months to it, but I'm excited to get to talk about the draft more. If you saw my question to Steelers afternoon drive last week, you definitely you know who my first round pick is. I'm not talking
I
to
know who
you
your first round
specifically. I'm
pick is.
talking about the listeners. They
Yeah.
know who it is.
The question there is going to be like, you got to be special at center to go in the first round. But I think that he is.
I'm just saying, Derek. I trust Derek more than most people when it comes to draft analysis because he's an absolute freak and doesn't sleep from January until April.
He does not.
Yeah. But he's watched his tape and he doesn't see a lot of flaws, or he doesn't see any flaws.
Yeah,
That's a quote.
He's very
He does
clean.
not see any flaws. So
he's a very clean prospect. All right, I think that's it for this week's Steelers episode. A little bit shorter than our Steelers episodes normally are, but again, a little bit different of an episode. Not a ton to talk about in terms of actual like headlines with the team. Maybe by next week's show, we get a receiver coach, we get a pass game coordinator. I don't know. Either way, get in questions to us, whether it's in the comments of this show or tweeting at us, DM, however it might be, however you want to get your questions to us, please. We're going to need them throughout this kind of dead period in the NFL post Super Bowl. We'll come up with content ideas. We're gonna have a show regardless, but it would sure make our lives easier if we get a bunch of questions in. So please do that. Go ahead.
last thing, it's Super Bowl Sunday coming up. Chiefs or 49ers?
I thought we kind of touched on this last week. I'm not picking against Mahomes. Like, I'm not doing it. Like, I know that he's been an underdog now 3 straight weeks. I'm not playing into this. I'm not going to be on the wrong side of history here, betting against Mahomes.
I mean, I'm not betting against Taylor Swift. People want to the Mahomes.
That's true
factor.
too.
I'm talking about the Taylor Swift factor too.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's played.
What's interesting here, more so than what team he thinks going to win, because there's been this debate too. Because like Peyton Manning came out and said he thinks there's going to be a bunch of points scored. But the Chiefs and 49ers defenses this year, like especially the Chiefs, honestly, because they've carried them. The offense for a lot of times this year did not look like you would think the Kansas City Chiefs offense would look like. I want your take on that. Do you think it's going to be more of an offensive game or a defensive game?
I think it has a feel of a defensive game. Way that the Chiefs defense has performed, especially in these playoffs, I feel like they're playing at a very high level, and the 49ers have a really good defense as well. I feel like it's more defensive setup. Could be very wrong by that. But it's just on the surface, I just don't see it being a very high scoring game. I don't think it's gonna be like a low scoring game either, but like scores
well,
of
that
like,
might be where I'm at, like in the middle, almost.
like in the 20s. Is that considered a high scoring game?
That would be low, because like the average points scored by the winner of the Super Bowl, at least over the last decade, if not longer. I just recently saw this. I don't fully remember how long back it dated, but it's at least over the last decade, has been 30 points, which it's pretty high. So I definitely think we're going to be under that for the winner.
Well, we have Taylor Swift versus Anna Fry. We'll see what happens. Do you understand the Anna Fry reference?
No.
Dude, you're such a boomer. Get on TikTok more.
See this. Anna Fry.
Brock Purdy looks like this high school girl from Utah named Anna Fry.
Oh, what the heck? Yeah.
Also, Anna Fry is like one of the top 10 tennis players in the country.
Yeah. Well, nothing on Taylor Swift. Anyways, in the description of the show, if you're watching or listening, wherever it is, you see it. Either way, Everything Custom Designs, our friend Haley Wagner, small business, custom t-shirts, hoodies, a lot of different types of clothing you can get, anything customized on those, just not hats still. So Everything But Hats Custom Designs by Haley Wagner. The link is down below. So check that out. I will wear my Around the 412 shirt next week. I promise for sure I will do that. Like, subscribe, hit that notification bell here. Leave us a 5-star review if you're listening somewhere else. All of our social media, be sure to follow us there, like it says on the ticker below. Tyler, for Smitty, this has been the Around the 412 Steelers show. We'll see you guys next week. Bye-bye.